All righty, welcome back to a special weekend interview episode of the Exit 52 podcast. Special on a former writer for the Baltimore Sun, ESPN the magazine, currently analyst for Baseball Tonight. In the press box for the Sunday night baseball between Orioles and Mariners tonight, Buster Olney. Thank you for joining us, taking some time out of your busy schedule, and again, chatting with us.
Yeah, good to talk with you guys, and thank you for the effort. I mean, there was a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff going on to make this happen, so I appreciate you guys being flexible, making adjustments, shifting schedules. It's been kind of nutty.
Hey, again, talking to you, we'll move mountains to get to you. So again, we're glad to have you on. Again, we appreciate you taking the time out, and welcome back to Baltimore. Again, you'd been here before, but what's your favorite thing about coming back to Baltimore, and what makes it just such a good baseball town? You may have gotten a little retaste of it last night with the Kjerstad Grand Slam and that atmosphere, but what makes it such a good baseball town?
The passion of the baseball fans. Look, when I interviewed to be the Orioles beat writer at the Baltimore Sun, John Carroll, who was then the executive editor, told me that as far as the newspaper was concerned, the Baltimore Orioles beat was as important as the White House beat, which says something, and probably not, but it was the sort of thing as a baseball writer you love to hear. And, in the 2 years that I was on the beat, I think I wrote 1,000 stories a year. It's just, and that reflects the interest of the fans, the passion of the fans here. And I got to cover the Orioles in the heyday of Camden Yards just after it opened, and it was filled every day. And so to see it again yesterday, the way that it was, and to think about what it might be this October, really cool. I always get that question, as I'm sure you guys do too, what's your favorite ballpark? And I think objectively, the ballpark in San Francisco probably is the best ballpark. I grew up in New England, so Fenway Park is a little special place in my heart. But I just love Camden Yards because of my history here. The 2 years I had here were so fun.
100%. And obviously so much has changed, Buster, since your time covering the Orioles. One of the huge changes this year is that the Angelos family offloads the Orioles to Rubenstein and the group that he's with ultimately. What are some of your memories that you have during your time on the beat with the Angelos family, with Peter and things like that? What comes to mind when you think of your time and the Angelos family?
And so many memories, because as a beat writer covering the team, I spoke to Peter most days, and usually at least once. So I've got 1,000 memories. Probably the one that makes people laugh the most is when I was the beat writer. Ken Rosenthal was the columnist here, and Kenny and Peter didn't talk. And so Kenny would write something that Peter felt was really critical. And so when I got Peter on the phone, he would wear me out for 10 minutes, just cuss me up and down, 12-letter words, everything, threaten to take away passes. He would ask me, what do you think? And I'm like, Peter, it's not really for me to say. If you have something you want me to pass on to Kenny, I'm happy to do that. And it was like I was a punching bag, and he would wear himself out. And I knew it wasn't personal. And then after about 10 minutes, we start talking baseball and all would be good. I actually had a lot of respect for Peter, how hard he worked, how much he cared. Clearly, I think that he, what made him great as a lawyer, being self-made, turned out to be a negative for him as a baseball owner. He just didn't trust people very readily.
Yeah, and again, we're kind of in between this the old ownership and the new one now. Again, you would have never seen Peter or John or Lou dancing on the dugout in a Hawaiian shirt. I don't think ever. And we see, David Rubenstein doing that last night. But again, it's kind of the a transition period. But the Orioles are obviously moving in the right direction. Where do you see them kind of in the hierarchy of the big teams in baseball? The Dodgers, the Phillies, the Yankees, Guardians, teams like that. Are the Orioles in that upper echelon of teams who can win it all?
There's no question about it. I mean, they have the best position player talent in baseball. It actually kind of reminds me of in 96 when the Orioles played the Yankees in the American League Championship Series. That was a Yankees team that had a young Derek Jeter and a young Jorge Posada and young Andy Pettitte, young Mariano Rivera. And you could feel during that season the difference in the athleticism between the two teams. I felt like the same thing happened in that series at Yankee Stadium, where you could feel this young, hungry Oriole team having something that the Yankees don't. The Yankees have great players, Judge and Soto. I think Volpe's terrific, excellent starting pitching. but they don't have the athleticism that the Orioles do. Now, I think at the moment, despite that, the Yankees clearly have big needs, bullpen. Orioles, I think, have big needs when you're talking about the rotation. I think at the moment, the most complete team in the American League are the Guardians. But, we haven't seen the work that Mike Elias is going to do before the trade deadline, and maybe that'll change.
100%. And
Spenny, before you jump in, that 96 ALCS, I was there with my dad. I was 7. He's a Yankee fan. And Darryl Strawberry fouled a foul. He fouled one off my dad's glasses, knocked his lens out, and it was just madness at Camden Yards, looking for the ball and all that. But I do just remember sitting in club level of Camden Yards and the entire place rocking and just being like, it's like goosebumps all over again. And that's kind of what we got a taste of with Yankees Orioles going forward. So I had to get that in there. But Spenny, you go on.
100%. That's an awesome story. And the word you use, Buster, athleticism. I'm going to ask you a question about Gunnar Henderson. That might be the answer. But what impresses you most about someone who turned 23 years old yesterday and what he's been doing in terms of his intensity? Is there any player that reminds you of someone at that age that is ascended to this point in the way or style that he plays in the last, decade or two? Who else comes to mind? He's on some crazy lists. You see Willie Mays, Alex Rodriguez, all these different lists that are like 8 players, and Gunner's on a lot of them at his age.
Mike Trout. I spent a lot of my Saturday on the phone with executives with other teams asking the same sort of question that people had after the year that Trout was drafted out of high school. If you remember, Trout went 25th overall, and within 2 years, Billy Beane, the general manager at that time of the Oakland Athletics, was telling me he's the best player in baseball, which made everyone wonder, how the hell did that guy drop to 25th in the draft? Well, there's similar questions now being asked in front offices about Gunnar Henderson because he's got Trout's physicality, right? He's this big guy, 6'3", 220, incredibly fast, incredibly powerful, fast twitch, just jumps out at you. I remember Aaron Boone, the Yankees manager, the first time he saw him, he said, yeah, he's going to be a problem. So teams around baseball are asking the question, how the hell did we not see this? How does this guy last until the 42nd pick in the draft? It really doesn't make any sense. I was exchanging texts on Saturday with a high-ranking executive, and I mentioned to him, I said, yeah, it's a little bit like Aaron Judge as a young age, except with more baseball skills. Because Aaron Judge, being that big, he took some time to sort of refine his baseball skills. Gunnar got all that at 23. It's crazy that he's this good. It's kind of crazy that he sort of slipped through everyone. With Trout, we know why, because he played in the Northeast, didn't play a lot of baseball compared to other kids. Gunnar Henderson's from the South. It doesn't make any sense that he lasted that long.
And Gunnar kind of headlines. Obviously, Adley was always Adley. He was the 1-1. He's the we all knew that he was going to be it. Again, Gunnar was kind of this forgotten guy, and I think 42nd pick, but he kind of headlined that group of young prospects that these are the next big guys that are going to come up, and the blonde bombers, call them whatever you want. Have you ever seen a team just stacked with talent in a farm system like the Orioles? And again, obviously, you've had your qualms with how they went about acquiring that. But have you ever seen a farm system just littered with picks and talent like that ever?
The Dodgers, I think, are probably the most comparable team. And look, the Dodgers haven't been picking number 1, but what they've done a great job of is when, they have a pick at the end of the first round, beginning of the second round, they have cashed in Walker Buehler, Will Smith, Dustin May, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That, to me, has always been the hidden strength of the Dodgers in recent years. And the Orioles are competing with that. You get an Adley Rutschman at a 1-1, a Kjerstad, at number 2. That's one thing. But when you can get a Gunnar Henderson at 42, you can get other guys later in the draft, that, to me, distinguishes your organization. Clearly, Mike and his staff have done a phenomenal job of first identifying the players like Gunnar, and then also developing after they get into their organization, because as you guys know, that doesn't always happen. So I think the Orioles are right there with the Dodgers in terms of player development in recent years.
And we will give you credit for this one. Jackson Holliday, you called that as, I think he was 8 or 9 years old when you said this kid's going to be a future MLB All-Star. He has the bloodline, obviously. He has the genetics. He's got it all. Struggle again when he came But what does he kind of have to do? And now he's kind of fighting through this elbow injury. But what do you think he has to do to again, kind of put all that behind him and be like, what does he have to do that we can all just click and be like, yes, that's the guy that we thought he was going to be. We know how good he is. For him to pick up here and just for us to forget that bad 2 or 3 week stretch that he had. Because again, obviously we know he's talented, but how does he put the pieces together?
And look, I think that, the journey that he's going to make is one that a lot of great players have made. I mean, Willie Mays just passed away, and we were reminded that at the beginning of his career, he was 3 for 52. Mike Trout, in that first time that he was called up for the Angels, he struggled, and he eventually worked that. And that's the trajectory that Jackson is going to have to take. He's going to be fully aware of that. And I hope, and I think so, because I know Matt well enough to know his father, of course. The question is, will any of what happened sort of affect his perspective? I'll always believe, and only Chris Bryant really knows, but I'll always believe that Chris's perspective on baseball and his relationship with the Cubs was changed a lot by that year when he was not promoted in the big leagues, potentially for service time issues. We heard Matt speak out about that early in the year. I again, just having a very brief sense of Jackson's holiday, I think can move past that. That is one of the things I think we'll wonder about going into the future.
100%. And maybe he did need a little bit of adversity. I think even Matt talked about that. He's just been raking for a long time. And Buster, obviously, we talk about holiday.
Can I cut in real quick? As you guys know, teams always talk about that. They do not want to promote a player until they feel like they've dealt with adversity. Like I've had general managers through the years say, yeah, that guy's hitting 450, but we got to wait. We got to wait for the 0 for 20 and then see him dig out of it, because that's something that all players go through at the major league level.
100%. And even like Elias said, he hasn't seen any major league lefties. I mean, then they call him up. He sees, had like 10 or 12 at bats against lefties, even in Norfolk before they brought him up. But Buster, obviously you took a lot of flack for the bad for baseball articles during the Orioles rebuild. And I think it's really easy for people to say like, oh, Buster, you were wrong. Look how good the Orioles are. But then you also look at a team like the Tigers, right? Who has missed on multiple picks, haven't been able to develop them. Torkelson, Mize back in the 2018. So you see teams that miss time and time again. With the Orioles now, tremendous success, not only just in drafting, but also development and then investing in international facilities, things of that nature. And looking at that, what the Guardians have done a little bit, the Pirates a little bit, and of course, tying it back to the Astros. Do you feel like this is a more repeatable process for small market teams who are, or mid-market, if you want to call them that are looking to compete with the Dodgers, Yankees, Phillies, or are those teams more of the outlier still?
I think it's sometimes, it can work and sometimes it doesn't. And look, given the fact that the owners have not addressed it, right? The practice of tanking, it's a strategy that if you're an owner, you could look at and say, this absolutely could work. Look, it worked for the Houston Astros. It worked for the Chicago Cubs. It's certainly the Orioles' success. It demonstrates it. The bad for baseball thing is not about the Orioles so much as the practice of tanking, because what I object to, I have objected to, and I wrote about this with the Astros back in 2013, wrote about it with other teams before the Orioles did it, was, look, you are essentially borrowing the competitive integrity of the people you're playing against. And on top of that, and this is the part that's always missed, it's not only about acquiring players, most of it's about making money for the owner. I find that to be objectionable, because you can, an owner can say, oh, cut the payroll to $30 million and I get to make many tens of millions of dollars that I could bank based on while borrowing the credibility of other teams and charging major league prices. That's a problem. And I wish baseball would deal with it. It's not just for the Orioles. I think clearly Mike is going to have a lot of knowledge of that strategy from his time with the Astros. And he's executed the strategy, which, again, is allowed by Major League Baseball, to perfection in terms of the players that they picked, development they've done. We all are sitting here wondering, okay, with a surplus of position players, and that's the safe bet when you're drafting and developing players, is in position players. How do you translate that into getting more pitching? That's the quandary that the Cubs face. As you guys know, they never really were able to cross that bridge of getting pitching in those years. We'll see if the Orioles are able to do it.
And you're talking about the influx of position players and talent and just guys in the minor leagues where the Orioles they could have a 35-man MLB roster and they still may not have enough spots for these guys.
Right.
Again, there's cornerstones down there for teams who, but any other team but the Orioles they'd be playing on. Who do you are there any trade guy? I mean, obviously trades have to be made. I think you talked about Chris Bassett on our buddy Glenn Clark's show on Friday.
Yeah.
And he goes out and he gets smoked with a 185-mile-an-hour line drive from Aaron Judge yesterday. Are there any other names that we should be paying attention to for the trade deadline that, again, some of these prospects, you're going to have to ship them out at some point. You got to break some eggs to make an omelet. Are there any other guys out there besides Bassett and some of those names you mentioned on Friday that I think the Orioles would target?
Yeah, Garrett Crochet to me is the most interesting guy. Like, he is potentially the most impactful player who could be traded before the deadline. White Sox left-hander. We talked about Gunnar Henderson's physicality. I mean, Garrett Crochet is the same way, except he's got 4+ years of service time. Any team that acquires him would get him for the rest of this year. They'd get him for next year. Maybe he'd be a guy that you would invest in. The interesting part there to me is that so far the White Sox posture to other teams is, well, maybe we'll trade him. I don't know. I think that's kind of crazy. I think given where the White Sox are, they probably should look to move him. But I think as we get close to the deadline, yes, Bassett, if the Blue Jays wind up selling, he, to me, is the sort of plow horse you love. He's under contract for next year as well as the rest of this year. The trade market has more needs more development before we know exactly who the Orioles could go for. And I think one of the interesting questions for the Orioles is, how much will the owner become involved in this conversation? When Mike was at the Astros, 2017, they're in August in the waiver period at that time, and they're looking for a starting pitcher, and they're having conversations with the Tigers about Justin Verlander. And Jeff Luhnow, who Mike worked for, basically told the owner, like, look, that price is too steep. I don't want to do that. And it was the owner who stepped in and said, let's make that deal. Giving up the extra 10% in value, whatever it is, now's the time. And we see that from time to time with owners. They will gather confidence and do that. One of the pivotal moments in Oriole history happened in 1996 when Pat Gillick arranged trades of Bobby Bonilla and David Wells, covering the team at the time. And Peter Angelos stepped in. I remember talking to Peter on the phone about this. And he was like, you know what? I've sold tickets to this year's team. I don't believe in the idea that you're going to tear it up in the middle of the year. And he killed those trades. And the Orioles went on and made the playoffs. I'll always believe that affected Peter's trust of what Pat Gillick and other GMs told him thereafter. I don't know which way this is going to go with the Orioles. My instinct is David seems to be very respectful, very, of what Mike has done, and rightfully so. Will there be a trade where he might say, you know what, I know it costs us a little bit more in value, but look at the team we have. Look at the opportunity that we have to win a championship, potentially fill our stands, and whether or not that'll happen. A lot of general managers, as you guys know, in this era are really reluctant to make expensive trades. And I'm curious to see what the Orioles do.
100%. This is so much fun, Buster. I grew up on watching you, one of the voices of my entire sports fandom. So it's such a pleasure to talk with you about this. It's giving me chills. I've been a big fan for a long time. But with that in mind, Buster, and I'm excited to ask you this question, which is a huge topic this year. The reason the Orioles are in such desperation is because Kyle Bradish, elbow. Dean Kramer, banged up. Tyler Wells, elbow. Even Felix Bautista. It's going around baseball right now. What is there to be taken away, if there are any takeaways, of this continued elbow spin rate conversation? And do you think that there's a path to making it more sustainable, less volatile, and just overall better for the sport? How can baseball step in and make this elbow epidemic, this UCL epidemic, this spin rate epidemic better for the sport and improve the product?
See, you just mentioned the spin rate epidemic. I think that's exactly where the root of this is. Where pitchers now are training themselves, they're training their bodies to throw as hard as they possibly can, to spin as hard as they possibly can. And I think that's the core reason for the breakdowns. There are a lot of other reasons, the individual histories of the pitchers. Maybe the pitch clock has a little something to do with it. I don't think it's a major factor, but I think it could be a factor for, pitchers getting tired during the course of a game. And I don't think that baseball can break away from this, because you can't tell players, look, it's not good for you to try to get better and to throw harder. Teams are not going to do that. I think you'd have to make a major structural change to the game. I wish they would do it, and that is to work to reinforce the preeminence of the starting pitchers. And that is to say, essentially, and I think the best way to do it would be to limit the number of relievers that are available. Look, the sport in the last 6 years has turned into a parade of relievers. Starters are throwing 4 1/3 innings, then they bring in, 5, 6 relievers. If you change the rules and say to a manager, look, you're only allowed to use 4 relievers per game, 5 relievers per game, and you give it a couple of years of development for teams to make that adjustment back, you'd require teams to rely more on the starting pitchers. Starting pitcher stays in longer. There's more offense, which the sport really wants. And I think that, I know that this has been talked about to some degree. Max Scherzer told me last fall about the double hook idea, the idea that you would tie the use of the starting pitcher to the designated hitter. Once you take out the starting pitcher, you have to take out the DH to incentivize the, keeping starting pitchers in the game. I think baseball needs to go to that. And it's not only about increased offense and trying to keep guys healthy, but let's face it, guys, growing up, starting pitchers were the headliners.
Mm-hmm.
For guys at your age, Pedro Martinez and Roy Halladay, Madison Bumgarner, Clayton Kershaw, these are the people who sell tickets to a 4:00 game. Like, wow, you know what? Corbin Burns is starting today against Garrett Cole. Let's go to that game. And that is being lost with how relievers are being used. I think the sport has to get back to making those guys big. And I think there's reason for the Player Association to want to get starting pitchers, more preeminence. They get paid more. And I think it would also, if you limited the number of relievers, rather than have this huge ocean of relievers available around baseball, if you limited it to 4 or 5, those guys would be paid better. So I think there's incentive for the Player Association to consider something like that.
Makes sense. And one of the pitchers that I thought you were going to mention and you didn't, and again, this will be, we'll get you out of here after this one. Mike Mussina, who, again, this was a topic of it was a sensitive topic the morning of what was it, May 20 whatever, when Adley came up and his number, the 35. Was that like a real issue, or was that just like was it just something that popped into your mind, or was that something that you had been kind of like sitting on for a while? And obviously Moose not getting his number retired, he doesn't have the statue out there with Earl and Jim and all them. But again, that, Orioles fans had fun with that. And it, even still to this day, there's a lot of like, don't tell Buster, Cole Irvin's wearing 19. He's wearing Chris Davis's number. So I had to ask about that.
Yeah. So, and obviously I covered Mussina and know him well. I covered him when he went to the Yankees. I was working at the New York Times when he signed with that team. I was having conversations with him and Angelos as he went into free agency and went through that process. And I know Peter's anger when Mike chose to sign with the Yankees rather than the Orioles. And there was a lot of spite in that relationship. At least Peter to Mike. I think Mike moved on, but Peter's angry about it. And so when Adley was called up and he gets assigned number 35, what I felt like right away was like, man, that closes the door on retiring the number for Mike. It had nothing to do with Adley, who clearly has nothing to do with this conversation. He's an amazing player. They'll probably retire 35 for him someday. But then I looked it up, and Mike Mussina is literally is the only player in all the Hall of Fame, who's been inducted, who did not have his number retired by his original team to spend at least 10 years with that team. Like, this is an outlier situation. And I know personally it's because of Peter's anger toward Mike. Now, I understand Mike was given the opportunity. Look, if you put an Oriole, logo on your Hall of Fame plaque, then we'll retire your number. And I think Mike rightly was like, I don't want to get into that. Like, I don't want deal making. Either I was worthy of it or not worthy of it. And I wish that the people involved had sort of risen above that conversation, just said, you know what? He was a great Oriole. He was drafted and developed here. He had tons of success here. And he has earned the right to have his number honored, rather than we need you to come and lick our boots in order to get your number retired. And it's too bad. And one of the great things about Peter Angelos, part of what made him great was his stubbornness. Okay. Same thing. I would always joke when I covered the team that Peter and Cal were the two most stubborn people in the history of Maryland. And I just was sad for the fact that that was an issue. The stubbornness was still there when that decision went down. And I wish there was some way where the Orioles could do right by, as I say, it's a total outlier when you look at all the numbers. In fact, I had an executive with another team last week who came through here and so was like, wait, the Orioles didn't retire Mussina's number? Like, it doesn't make any sense. What they could do is retire 35. I know Mike well enough to know that if he had a conversation with Adley, he'd be like, yeah, that's fine. He could wear it. Mm-hmm. But Mike earned that right.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, it's always a topic that comes up. And again, one last one. This could be a two-word answer. You ever get tired of Charles, your producer, rocking the Orioles gear and the hat when you guys record?
No, we have a lot of fun with it. I love the great thing is, I think that the Taylor, he speaks for the fans, right? With his perspective. And I love the passion, when the Orioles didn't make trades to add a couple of years ago, he spoke for the fans. I get that from him, and I get it from my 20-year-old son, who is a huge fan of the Atlanta Braves. And that's always I was a huge Dodger fan as a kid. And I missed that part of doing this, following baseball with that sort of passion.
He's a good egg. You got a good one there. I'm sure you know that. But
yeah.
Again, we will get you out of here. Thank you again for coming on. Good luck with tonight. Hopefully, you can talk about the Orioles getting a 4-game sweep, a mop as they call it. But again, we appreciate you coming into town, covering the team, and popping on here to chat a little bit. So thank you, Buster.
Thanks, guys. And again, I appreciate you guys making this work because we had some back and forth about it.
We really appreciate you, Buster. Thank you so much.